Chicago Bears head coach Ben Johnson did the interview circuit at the NFL owners' meetings, where he talked about how he feels about drafting running backs early, like Ashton Jeanty, how he feels about arm length for offensive tackle, and some of his other priorities when it comes to this upcoming NFL draft, and some hints we can start to piece together.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we're going to go through some of the big quotes Ben Johnson gave about the upcoming NFL draft in a few different interviews at the NFL's owners' meetings. We'll hear about what drew him and the Lions to drafting Jahmyr Gibbs early in the draft that could lead them down a similar path towards someone like Ashton Jeanty in the first round this year. We'll hear Ben Johnson's thoughts on arm length for offensive linemen and how important or not it is for offensive tackles to have a certain measurement threshold reached. And he also talked more broadly about some of his other priorities when it comes to pass protection for his offense. And also he gave a pretty strong quote about Tyler Warren we might want to sneak in here as well if we've got time on the podcast today. But I wanted to start with the running back conversation because that conversation will be pretty regular and ongoing all the way up until draft day. If the Bears have a chance to draft Ashton Jeanty with the 10th overall pick, will they pull the trigger and do so? Because it's very easy to point to, 2 years ago, the Detroit Lions, actually they traded down, I believe, but took Jahmyr Gibbs with the 12th overall pick. So just outside of the top 10, but took Jahmyr Gibbs. I think they traded 12 from 6 or 7 down to 12 to that spot. But taking a running back in the top 12, the second running back in that draft class, someone who is obviously a big success for the Lions, it's easy to sort of piece together then that maybe Ben Johnson wants to get his Chicago version of Jahmyr Gibbs and whether Ashton Jeanty can be that caliber of player, not the same style of player necessarily, but that caliber of player in terms of, one of the NFL's leading rushers and a dynamic playmaker that opens up a lot of different things for your offense. And so Ben Johnson did an interview with CHGO and reporter Adam Hogue over there. I'd highly recommend going and listen to the whole interview because it was really a bunch of great questions from Adam. But a quick little quote from Ben Johnson here. I just pulled the beginning of it here to read through as opposed to pulling the actual audio. But what Ben Johnson said was, when drafting Jahmyr Gibbs, he said, quote, "I don't know that we necessarily saw him as a running back as much as a dynamic weapon." And Johnson would go on to say, when you're going to draft a running back that high, or when you're going to consider taking a running back in the top 12 like that, you need someone who's a game changer. He said, a player that can strike fear into opposing defenses. And Johnson talked about these players, needing those kind of elite traits that can strike that fear, whether it's having elite speed or elite contact balance, so they're so hard to tackle, or elite receiving ability as a running back out of the backfield, right? Like those kind of things are what can help a running back like Jahmyr Gibbs or potentially like someone like Ashton Jeanty qualify as a player they might see worth taking this early in the NFL draft. I can't help but feel like the contact balance phrase there is particularly a nod to Ashton Jeanty as far as someone who players just absolutely bounce off of him. And he's got really elite skill in that regard. Not only is he fast and explosive and powerful, but people bounce off of him in a way that is always so impressive. And it feels to me like when you hear and read that Ben Johnson quote, Ashton Jeanty seems like the kind of player who would fit that mold in their eyes. That doesn't mean that's their number one choice. That's who they're for sure going to take. I again still think Jeanty does not make it to the Bears at 10, and they don't even get the opportunity to decide on whether they want to take Jeanty or not. But I think Jeanty certainly checks the boxes of a player that someone like Ben Johnson would consider at that point. And I'm not sure that Omarion Hampton of North Carolina, for example, is kind of the consensus number 2 running back in this draft class. I'm not sure he's quite in that same category. He has that like long home run speed, the breakaway speed if he gets ahead of steam, but and he's a very good running back, but maybe not the same like strike fear into your heart type of special player that Ben Johnson talks about there. And I'm also left feeling like you can find so many players in this draft class that have some of those types of special traits and have some of that ability. Maybe not top 10 overall pick ability, but when you talk about like finding someone who can be a game changer, like sure, DeAndre Swift can be a game changer. He had, I think, 4 runs of 20 plus yards this past season. I'm not saying that makes him a game changer, but how you want to play the semantics of, well, what really qualifies a game changer? Can he have breakaway touchdown type of play, right? Like, I think you look in this draft class and somebody like Caleb Johnson from Iowa as an outside zone runner, like in the second or probably more like third round, like, can he be a game changer? I think he can. Like, he's not the top elite of all running back athletes in this draft class, but he's got some of that next level ability. Or Travion Henderson in the second round from Ohio State is another guy that I think, like, the electricity, explosiveness, playmaking ability, like, that can be a potential game-changing player here who you get him the ball out in space, and he's going to find ways to make it work. That doesn't mean he's a player that's worth taking with the 10th overall pick in this same category, but it does mean, like, you don't necessarily have to get a player with that 10th overall pick. Like, if you miss out on Jeanty, it's okay. This is a deep, strong running back draft class. Both Ohio State kids I like a lot, especially Travion Henderson as a potential second-round pick option, or Cam Sketabo from Arizona State is going to be in this conversation. I really like Brashard Smith from SMU as a potential later-round guy. Trevor Etienne, I think, has the physical tools. I think that he can still be refined as a running back. Like, even later in this draft, you can find guys like that have top, like, plus athletic ability that can be important contributors to your offense that aren't Jeanty great, but are still very, very good. And we've talked before on this podcast about how every year you can find running backs that play at an extremely high level. So I think Jeanty fits the bill for Ben Johnson as a player that should qualify as a draftable top 10 player and not a running back that is worth being taken as high as he did. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think he can be not just a running back, but a pure offensive weapon there. But it's not Jeanty or bust when it comes to the running back position. The Bears definitely, I want to see the Bears draft a running back at some point in this draft class. Maybe not in the first round, but still plenty of opportunities to add premium players at that position, even if you don't land the top option from Boise State. To me, it leans more likely that the Bears go particularly offensive line at 10 seems more likely to me as far as a player being there and also being the best player available for the Chicago Bears. And Johnson gave us a good answer as to, like, without getting specifically into Will Campbell from LSU or Calvin Banks from Texas, like, how he feels about the arm length measurement question when it comes to offensive linemen more generally. And I think he did a good job of answering the question without definitively telling us for sure what he thinks about those two prospects, but we can kind of piece together the dots ourselves from what he said. We'll go through how that affects what the Bears might decide to do on the offensive line next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, whoa, like, where did all my money go so fast? Between, dining out and online shopping and entertainment, sometimes it can be easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in, because Monarch Money is your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. It isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. I have the Monarch Money app on my phone, and it's a really convenient place because I can go, instead of having my credit card app here and my bank account app here and my retirement account app here and my investing account here, it's all in one place where you can track your spending and your finances and plan long-term goals. And it's a great way to just stay on top of every little thing that you're not always paying attention to every little minutia, but when it's all in one place, it is really easy to keep track of and see it in a super visual way, if you're not a numbers person, kind of like me, like seeing it visually makes a world of difference. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's Monarch, MONARCH, money.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. So Johnson danced around the running back conversation, kind of gave us a hint of like, hey, yeah, this is what we liked about Gibbs. You do the rest of the thought. You connect the dots then on Ashton Jeanty. And I will say some of this stuff can be a little bit of a Rorschach test of like seeing what you want to see and hearing what you want to hear. And I think that's a little bit stronger with when he was asked about offensive line arm length. For especially, in this draft, we talk about it a lot with Will Campbell, whose arms measured really short at the combine, slightly less short at his pro day. And I think getting less attention as a result of how much attention Will Campbell is Kelvin Banks from Texas, who also has shorter arm length for an offensive tackle position translating in the NFL, where there's some question marks about exactly what position they may play in the professional ranks. And so Ben Johnson was asked by CHGO and Adam Hogue again in a great interview. I'd recommend you going and taking a listen to that. How do you feel about arm length when it comes to the offensive tackles? Like, is there a threshold there for you? Does that become a concern if a player measures in at a certain length that isn't as long as you might want it to be? And what Ben Johnson said is like, he goes in and he watches the tape without knowing first what the actual arm measurement of any given player is, right? What he said was like, the full quote I should pull from him. He says, "I love watching the tape without knowing anything. To me, that's the most important indicator about whether a guy can play football or not. As you're watching the tape, if concerns arise about getting long-armed on the perimeter," he talked about other examples of like, if you look on tape and you're seeing issues with the arm length and it becomes a consistent problem, he said, then yeah, I'll look at the arm length and see if it fact checks or not. But really, the tape to me is more important than the measurables. That last quote is the big one for Ben Johnson. The tape to me is more important than the measurables. That is Ben Johnson telling you there's not a magic number for them on what an offensive lineman's arm length is supposed to be. They don't have a set rule where it says, boy, if your arm doesn't hit 33 or doesn't hit 34 inches or whatever the number's going to be, anything short of that number, you're done. You're playing a guard. You're just not going to be a tackle for us. Like, it is not a hard and fast threshold rule. But what Ben Johnson did say is if you're watching tape and if concerns about the arm length show up on tape, and his quote was, and it becomes a consistent problem, then yeah, I'll look at arm length and see if it fact checks or not. And then, okay, if he plays like arm length is a problem, and then you can confirm that, hey, yeah, arm length is a problem, then that's when you have the conversation about moving a player inside to guard as opposed to leaving them outside at tackle. And so what that tells you is like the Bears will not just automatically rule out Will Campbell as a left tackle or Kelvin Banks as a left tackle, or even some players later in this draft like Marcus Mbow from Purdue is a guy who's kind of played some tackle and guard. Like for any prospect, but especially I think these guys in the first round, arm length measurement itself is not going to be the determining factor. It's how the length of their arms affected their play on tape. And that's where this is, again, a little bit of a Rorschach test where it's like, if you see what you want to see here, right? Like, I look at the tape of Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks, honestly, and I think on both players' tape, there are certainly examples of longer pass rushers being able to make that contact first and get their hands inside because you just don't have as much length out at the offensive tackle position. Now, was it a consistent problem? That was the language that Ben Johnson used there. If it becomes a consistent problem, I wouldn't say that for Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks. But the question is like, maybe it wasn't a consistent problem at the college level, but how confident are you that it won't be a, quote, consistent problem at the NFL level? Like, how often does it have to show up on the college tape for you to be concerned about it being a problem? Is it every once in a while? Because that's the thing about arm length and offensive tackles. even tackles who have longer arms, like if you're just slower to get your hands out, even if your arms are longer, you're going to have problems with long arm pass rushers. Like, if the other guy has long arms, it's going to be tough no matter how long your arms are, and your technique can make up for that. I think the thing that concerns me a little bit more, or what adds to the concern, I will say, it doesn't concern me more, but like what adds a little bit more concern to it for Campbell and Banks is like, I think with both guys, it's not just in the passing game, but it's in the running game as well, where you can see sometimes they have to get up over their toes a little bit more when they're trying to generate force moving forward. Like when you want to be able to keep that space and really utilize the length to get full leverage and power from your core through your hands, through your arms into your hands, into the opposing player in the running game. And when they're having to get out over the toes and lean quite a bit forward, they can be a little bit more off balance as run blockers as well. And again, we come back to this question of like consistent problem. I mean, how do you define consistent problem? Like frequent problem, no. But how many times do you have to see it on tape before you say, hey, wait a minute, is it if it happens once a game, like is that a consistent problem here? I don't mean to get hung up on the language, right? But that's what makes this so impossible to like pin down exactly how they might feel about this, because they might watch tape and see a certain thing, and someone else might watch the tape and see something slightly different, or might watch, if you don't watch every single snap, maybe some snaps you see it more than others. Like that's just how, that's some of the art as opposed to the science of watching film and football. And so to me, I still have enough of a question there. Like I think for a guy like Will Campbell, if we'll pin it down on him for a second, is Will Campbell having a consistent problem with arm length on tape? I wouldn't say how I define a consistent problem. No, I wouldn't call it a consistent problem. But does it show up just enough to be like, well, it could be more of a problem in the NFL when there's more arm length among edge rushers and there's higher quality pass rushers at all times. Like that's where it's like, no, it wasn't necessarily a consistent problem on tape, but it's enough of a factor that I have question marks about it. And that doesn't mean I automatically move him inside the guard, but it does mean that's a factor in my evaluation, right? It detracts something from where I still think Campbell's a guy who can be successful at tackle, but I'm less 100% confident he can be successful at tackle, but I still think he can be a successful guard, right? And that's where it becomes a little bit trickier there. I think the main takeaway for me is that the Bears are not going to just write this off automatically based on a number. They are going to evaluate on the tape. We just don't know exactly what that evaluation is going to bring back in terms of how consistently they see that being a problem and what their level of comfort is with whatever frequency they see it being a problem. I have a feeling they might be willing to make that a possibility, but I also get the feeling like they might not get the chance. Just like with Ashton Jeanty, could Will Campbell go in the first 9 picks before the Bears get a chance to take him? I think he could go as early as 4 to the Patriots. Just like someone like Ashton Jeanty could maybe go as early as 4 to the Patriots. So it's going to be a real wild card top 10 to see if the Bears even have a chance to draft either of these guys. But I do think we've heard Ben Johnson now make it pretty clear that if all else is equal, offensive line is going to continue to be his priority, even in the NFL draft here, even after everything they've already added at that spot. And he gave a quote to me that I thought was really emblematic of this and spoke a lot to, I think, what they would ideally want is someone like Will Campbell or Armand Membu with that 10th overall pick if they have the chance to do so. But he also raved about Tyler Warren. So we'll take a look at a couple other things Ben Johnson said and how that shapes what we'll see in the draft at the end of, this month, now that April has started, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now is a great time to get in on all of the exciting action on FanDuel. With March Madness, we're getting down to the Final Four already, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before, because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bet if you win your first $5 bet. It's an extra $200 to use on buzzer beaters, to who's cutting down the nets, so you can back your teams with spreads, totals, and game props all throughout the rest of both college basketball tournaments. Or if college hoops aren't your thing, that's okay. You can bet on the upcoming NFL draft as who are going to be the first 3 picks in the draft in any order. You can bet on the players at those spots. You can bet on specific players drafted to specific teams. What team is going to draft Ashton Jeanty? The Bears are second favorites on that, behind the Las Vegas Raiders, and so much more, all in a FanDuel app that's easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long with America's #1 sportsbook. Ben Johnson made offensive line a very quick priority at the start of free agency and even right before it, with trades for Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney, and I think he still isn't done prioritizing that position. And it shouldn't be a surprise given how much they invested in the offensive line in Detroit, but I really liked a quote from Ben Johnson at owners' meetings. This one was in an interview with The Athletic. I think it was Adam Johns, but I actually didn't double-check which author had written that story for The Athletic. I should double-check that here as I scroll up to the top of the story. Kevin Fishbane, credit to Kevin Fishbane and The Athletic for a quote from Ben Johnson about being, the story was about Ben Johnson as a play caller, but I think it informed how he has approached the offseason and may continue to approach the NFL draft for the Chicago Bears. The story from Fishbane was really cool about how Johnson getting into play calling when he was a high school quarterback and really being interested in plays, and then throughout his coaching career, how he has sort of developed and grown as a play caller. And Ben Johnson talked about how initially he's, as a kid kind of, or as a young coach coming out of high school and college and stuff, he was always focused on like the route concepts and how are we going to beat this coverage and what kind of combination of receivers can make this player and get open. And then he kind of, as he grew into it and matured a little bit more, all of a sudden the focus for him became a lot less on the routes and stuff and a lot more on the pass protection. And the quote he gave was that, at this level, that's where my mind really starts. How do we find enough time to get the ball off? Because we can all draw up coverage beaters for everything. But really, the sauce is whether we get it off fast enough or how do we buy a little extra time so that we can push it down the field. And that quote from Ben Johnson to me, it says very loudly like, hey, listen, like if we're trying to decide between a receiver or an offensive lineman, we're going to prioritize the offensive lineman. Because as he says, like you can draw up the right combination of routes to beat just about anything, right? Like if you can figure out what the coverage is going to be, you can find the routes to beat that coverage. Like every coverage has vulnerabilities, and there are certain routes or combinations of routes already designed to beat certain coverage. If they're in cover 2, then these are going to be the routes that might work. Or if they're in man coverage, these are going to be the routes that should work. Like that part is, I don't want to say the easy part, but that part's more the automatic part. What's less easy and automatic is how you're going to give your quarterback enough time to get the pass off. How quickly can you get rid of the ball? How much time can you give him to get rid of the ball? And Ben Johnson made it very clear, like, that's the priority. That's the more interesting part to him. And so when I try and apply this to the NFL draft, that doesn't mean they're only going to take an offensive lineman in the first round because it's offensive line or bust, so go get the offensive lineman no matter where you rank him. No, but I do think if all else is equal and they have an opportunity to add to the offensive line, that's a priority. Like, it's not saying you don't need wide receivers, you don't need tight ends, you don't need running backs, but the more difficult, challenging part here is how do we give the quarterback more time? And so I think that's why you haven't seen them go out and invest more in a number 3 wide receiver or a number 2 tight end. Like they went kind of cheaper with Durham Smythe as your number 2 tight end and Olamide Zaccheaus as your number 3 wide receiver right now. Like they could still add more at either of those positions in the NFL draft. And if there's a wide receiver or a tight end that they really see as a great player, they would probably certainly still take him. But if you had an offensive lineman you really liked and a weapon you really liked, and they were pretty similar, it sure sounds to me like Ben Johnson is going to lean and prefer the offensive line in that regard. And that's refreshing and something that's really nice to hear. Now, if they're not head to head, neck and neck in their eyes, that could change the math here. Like Ben Johnson gave some quotes about the tight end Tyler Warren from Penn State. He was just asked, you watch this film, what do you think about him? I believe it was Adam Hogue from CHGO, and he told a story about how, he talked about how Tyler Warren he's just an all-around football player that you'd love to have in your offense, and how they were watching film on him as a coaching staff, and Dennis Allen spoke up and talked about how difficult it would be to have to defend a player like Tyler Warren on opposing offenses. It was a pretty ringing endorsement from Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen of a tight end like Tyler Warren as a potential option there for the Chicago Bears first round pick. And so like I come back to the same idea where it's like, sure, if it's Tyler Warren versus, Will Campbell or Armand Membo, and you've got the tight end and the offensive lineman very close, Ben Johnson sounds like the kind of guy who would prefer the offensive lineman. But if your top lineman's off the board and you got a weapon right there, you're not just going to take the next lineman. You're going to take the weapon if you view him as clearly the better player. He obviously has an affinity for wanting players like that in his offense as well, but it's just more of an idealized, like if you can, grab the offensive lineman there. And I think about the same thing for the defense, right? Like where the Bears are drafting at 10, ideally you want a pass rusher, but if you can't get a pass rusher, you're not just going to reach and take the pass rusher that is next available on the board. You're going to take the best player, even if it's not what you would ideally prefer at that spot. But that's just generally how the draft board is going to crumble here. And I think about when Ben Johnson talks about prioritizing the blocking, how are you going to give the quarterback enough time? One of the ways to give the quarterback more time is with a tight end who can block, or with a running back who can block, right? Like there could be a prioritization of that. Like I think that's why you look at it and he's got DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, and Zacchaeus and Devin Duvernay, and like, okay, maybe that's enough at wide receiver because we can scheme those guys open. You need talent there, but once you got a couple of pretty good guys, you can scheme them open, but you got to find ways to give your quarterback time, and that's where investment in a tight end, investment in a running back can offer you the advantages of both a weapon that can do damage, but then also assisting in that prioritization of pass protection and time for the quarterback to be able to get the ball to those weapons that you do have and to be able to execute the route concepts and passing schemes that you did build in for him to be able to do so. And so I'm curious then, when it comes to the actual draft, how this plays out for the Bears, how they balance those priorities there. With 4 picks in the top 75, how many of those end up being offensive linemen? Because there's a possibility here where maybe you get say a running back you get Jeanty in the first round, and then a pass rusher in the second round, and a defensive tackle or a safety in the second round. And you get to the third round and you go like tight end there or linebacker, whatever it might be. Like you could get through those first 4 picks and not get a single offensive lineman as much as you might want one, or you could go through those first 4 picks and get 2 offensive linemen. You could get a tackle at 10, like Will Campbell or Armand Membu or Kelvin Banks. You could come back in the second round and get a guard or a center. Like you could double up on the offensive line and really, really make that priority. Or you could say, well, we'd like to do more on the offensive line, but we've done a decent amount there, and we're just not lining up with getting the best player available, and they could let them go. So like how the Bears prioritize that based on the board is going to be one of the more fascinating aspects of the draft for me this year. It's like, if there are great offensive linemen there in the first round and the second round, will that truly be their priority? Or will there be a point where they say, well, we need to get some other stuff here and need to expand beyond just continual investment in the offensive line? Because I'm still left feeling like you can never do too much there. You're going to need better backups than you have right now. You're drafting these linemen for the next 5 to 10 years, not just this year. So even if that guard in the second round isn't a day one starter, you're going to have injuries. There's going to be roles in the future. Like, it's worth it to keep doubling down at that spot. We'll see if Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson agree, and if the draft board plays out in a way that allows them to do that, or if there's just better players at other positions, then you can't just force yourself into taking offensive line. We'll talk plenty more about what the Bears' different options are, including in those second and third rounds. I do want to talk about the possibility of maybe trading up from that second round pick, getting back into the first round is a real possibility for the Bears, given the ammunition that they have. So we'll talk more draft trades and more different options for this Bears draft class, all leading up to the draft at the end of the month, right here on Locked On Bears. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for more draft talk, you can always find it on the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast for a second listen today with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Or if you want more football talk, you can check out Locked On NFL, our national show. I co-hosted this morning's Locked On NFL with Tyler Rowland. I do that every Tuesday morning, and we talked about Aaron Rodgers working out with DK Metcalf and the Steelers. We talked about the Cleveland Browns admitting the Deshaun Watson trade is a disaster. And we talked about the potential banning of the tush push at NFL owners meetings. So there's always more football talk here in the Locked On Podcast Network. There's always more Bears talk coming to you on tomorrow's Locked On Bears podcast, along with another opportunity to bear down.